I'm going to start the live stream on YouTube. It's taking just a moment. And we will see people are coming in. That's great. Welcome. All right. And the live stream is online and we can start right now.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, liebe Studierende, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Ich begrüße Sie ganz herzlich zur heutigen Arnheim Lecture und ich weiß, dass Sie als erstes die Begrüßung durch Professor Dr. Peter Klaus Schuster vom Vorstand der Stiftung Brandenburger Tor erwartet haben. Da es jedoch, wie so häufig, technische Probleme gab, darf nun ich Sie als geschäftsführende Direktorin des Instituts für Kunst- und Bildgeschichte der Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin auch im Namen der Kooperationspartner, also der Stiftung Brandenburger Tor, des Deutschen Akademischen Auslandsdienst, namentlich Melanie Rumegier, sowie der Staatlichen Museen zu Berlin, hier des Generaldirektors Prof. Dr. Michael Eisenhauer, ganz herzlich willkommen heißen. Ich begrüße vor allem Prof. Dr. Andrea Giunta aus Buenos Aires, unsere derzeitige 38. Arnheim-Gastprofessorin und Vortragende am heutigen Abend. So gerne wir jetzt mit Ihnen im Max-Liebermann-Haus, in dem sich die Stiftung Brandenburger Tor als Kulturstiftung der Berliner Sparkasse seit nunmehr fast 25 Jahren befindet, zusammenkämen, so sehr danken wir vom Institut für Kunst- und Bildgeschichte unseren Kooperationspartnern sowie vor allem Andrea Giunta, dass sie sich auf das digitale Semester eingelassen haben. Sinn und Zweck der Arnheim-Gastprofessur ist all dies, was sich zurzeit nicht realisieren lässt. Die Begegnung im Institut und in Berlin, der lebendige fachliche Austausch im Kollegium sowie vor allem auch mit den Studierenden. Jedes Semester sind wir aufs Neue begeistert, wenn wir die Veranstaltungen unserer Arnheim-Gastprofessur bei der Lehrplanung ins Programm aufnehmen. Die Studierenden schätzen es ungemein, immer wieder andere internationale Wissenschaftler und Wissenschaftlerinnen, deren Forschungsthemen und Lehrmethoden persönlich kennenlernen zu können. Die Arnheim-Gastprofessur ist für das Institut für Kunst- und Bildgeschichte eine große Bereicherung und so freue ich mich sehr auf den heutigen Vortrag von Andrea Giunta, die meine Kollegin Kathleen Christian gleich vorstellen wird. Ich möchte aber zuvor noch ganz, ganz herzlich Franziska Fenner von der Stiftung Brandenburger Tor danken, die, Sie werden es sicherlich nicht merken, im Hintergrund waltet und die Regie des heutigen Abends führt. Und ja, ganz, ganz herzlichen Dank für die wunderbare Vorbereitung und die ganze Organisation. So, jetzt gebe ich aber ab an Kathleen Christian.
Okay, thank you, Katrin. I'll switch to English and also send my thanks to Franziska Fenner. And I'm very pleased to introduce the Rudolf Arnheim professor, Professor Andrea Giunta. I'm pleased but also saddened that COVID has prevented us from welcoming Andrea Giunta in person in Berlin, as much as we would have loved to have her in the community and as much as I know she wanted to come. At the same time, we're so pleased that she could still teach 2 wonderful seminars at the Institute for Kunst- und Bildgeschichte, and of course, be here with us this evening to share some of her research. Andrea Giunta is currently professor of modern and contemporary Latin American art at the University of Buenos Aires, Argentina. She's also principal researcher at Argentina's National Scientific and Technical Research Council, CONICET. Professor Giunta has received numerous prestigious fellowships from the National Gallery of Art's Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts, from the Getty Foundation, from the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. She previously held a chair in Latin American art history and criticism at the University of Texas at Austin, where she served as founding director of the Center for Latin American Visual Studies. In 2013, she became a founding director of the National University of San Martin's Experimental Art Center in Buenos Aires. She's received numerous awards and is a 3-time recipient of the Connex Award granted in Argentina for cultural achievement. Professor Giunta has been a visiting professor at many other institutions, among them Duke University, the University of Monterrey, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, New York University, and Columbia University, where she was Tinker Visiting Professor in 2017. In addition to her numerous publications, Professor Giunta has curated or co-curated a number of major exhibitions, notably Radical Women, Latin American Art 1960 to 1985. So the title of the talk we will hear from her tonight will be Feminisms and Activisms in Contemporary Latin American Art. And I'll give the word to you.
Thank you. Thank you to Professor Müller for her introduction, and to you, Professor Christian, for your introduction of my CV. Thank you very much. And also for whoever that make possible for me the extraordinary experience of being teaching at the Humboldt Universitat as Rudolf Arnheim visiting professor. The presentation I will do today under the title Feminisms and Activism in Contemporary Latin American Art is a presentation based on a recent research, archival research. I am putting together a lot of images and some elements for considering connections between artistic feminist practices in Latin America and in Germany. Then what I will do is to share this archive with you, some preliminary conclusions, and open the conversation for questions or doubts or exchanges about the material I will share now with you. The material, wait a second, okay. And I will stop the video for you to see just the material, and this is the presentation. And I want to begin in the 70s to propose you that the relationships between art and feminism, although it were isolated examples in Latin America, were very much contemporary with those that occur in artistic scenes in Europe, but particularly in the United States. These are some captures of the film that the filmmaker Maria Luisa Bember from Argentina, who participated in the Argentine Feminist Union that was created in the early 70s. And this activism was followed by her feminist activist film, The World of Women, in 1972. It's very much in a way connected with some propositions of Judith Chicago in the 70s, when she launches the first feminist art program at California State University in Fresno. She was using this activism for being presented to high school students. And in 1975 was organized the International Women's Year in Mexico City, and a lot of exhibitions were made around this international encounter, in which the young artist Monica Mayer was participating in a workshop and found information about Judith Chicago's initiative for a program of education in art and feminism. Then she traveled to Los Angeles to participate in the program. When she returned, she produced this work that is an emblematic work in Mexican feminism against sexual harassment in Mexico City, Clothesline, in 1978. And it is a work that was reinstalled several times, and these images are taken by the reinstallation in the Hammer Museum during Radical Women. And then she is making a kind of social research, about harassment and reactions and description of the situations where this happened. Then between 1979 and 1980, she organized an international dialogue between feminist artists from LA and Mexico, which included workshops, tours on different cities, sharing meal. Here is in the house of Monica Mayer, where she received the artists from LA. And these are images of a workshop that was organized at Cuernavaca City in Mexico. Then she get part of this experience in a booklet. This is the cover of the booklet that was exhibited in LA and in Germany, in Berlin, in 1981. Then I find online a lot of information about this exhibition that was made as a collaboration between Mexican and German artists. And although the critics repeated well-known cliches about the art made by female artists, like what is specific about women's art, or why exhibit them as female artists and not just as artists, it also were some critics that evaluated the collective effort to organize the exhibition in haste and with few resources, like this quote I introduced by Helmut Kodanek in Die Wahrheit. The very creation of this exhibition is a remarkable achievement. In a very short time, with almost no financial support, the women who had the first idea managed to organize 2 exhibitions. Last summer, they could be seen in Mexico City, one with works by West Berlin artists and one by Mexicans. All of this was thanks to the initiative of women who had set themselves the goal of getting artists to know each other better and about their work, their lives, their thoughts, and their social situation. It is interesting to, open the archive of this exhibition. I would like to know who were the German artists and to know better about the exchanges they were producing. I have to say that until recently, I just know that the work by Monica Mayer was presented in a collective exhibition, in a group exhibition in Berlin, but I didn't have any other material. Then this let us know how useful is to open archives, to digitalize. This is the only photography I find about the exhibition, the catalog. And also, this is a situation that we will see how is still repeated, initiatives of exchange that came from personal contacts, friendship, and sharing information. This is the cover of the catalog. Here is all the information, but also the pages of the catalog where you can see that it were participating Magali Lara, Monica Mayer, and also Maris Bustamante, 3 key artists in the camp feminism. Both of them, Monica Mayer and Maris Bustamante, were creating a group, a collective, integrated by 2 artists, Black Chicken Powder, between 1983 and 1990. Then it is interesting because these 2 artists were mixing the agendas of feminism with humor, popular culture, and activism. Like here, for example, they were making a performance in Mexico City, trying to, to evil eye, doing the evil eye to rapists. And then it's a lot of humor in these urban performances they were organizing, and a strong introduction of a collective activity. Here where the receipt for producing these kind of mixes, appealing very much to popular culture in Mexico City, which they both were mixing with their personal works and the works that they were producing together. For example, this is also an action they did, giving a lot of lectures using public support for updating knowledge about art in schools, in high schools. Then with these disguises and performance and a lot of grotesque also. No, then these were part of the activities they were organizing together, and also, for example, this performance they did in a set of television. The title was Mother of a Day, in which they queerized motherhood, transforming the host of the program into a potential mother using prosthetics, ornaments, and humor. Or when at the same time that they were producing this kind of performances, they were marching in demonstrations for the legalization of abortion with huge orthopedic bellies, putting the paradigms of motherhood in crisis and taking their maternal bodies to the streets, where they fought for the right to decide on their own body. Then this is something for underlying, no, the activism through art in some art spaces and alternative spaces they were choosing for the interventions, but also through activism in the street with women organizations. Then we have here these two examples, 1972, 1978, that demonstrate the early relationship between art, feminism, and activism in Latin America. No? And it should be noted that the agenda of the 60s and the 70s, even when it has been modified, expanded, and reformulated in theoretical and activist terms, is still valid in Latin America, where abortion remains illegal in much of Latin American countries. We should remember that with the exception of Uruguay, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guyana and French Guiana, and Mexico City, and since December 30, 2020, in Argentina, these are the only places in which the interruption of pregnancy is legal in Latin America. And we have to consider also how much violence against women has increased. Then what we can say is that the agenda of the 60s, not just in Latin America, but in many other parts of the world, since, for example, violence against women or feminized bodies is still very strong, is an active agenda in present time. But of course, this seminal agenda has been notably expanded since the 80s to the present. Women and feminism have been linked to urgent political contexts such as dictatorships, which led to the organization and strategies of women's resistance in different Latin American countries. Then, at the same time that feminism and artistic practices were involved with this agenda, feminism in Latin America distanced itself from the essentialist binary logics by investigating queer, lesbian, and trans genealogies in art and culture that question the patriotic national model founded by white men, our heroes. It was also, and it is also, a feminist activism in terms of race, highlighting the mestizo, indigenous, and Afro-Latin American condition of the largest percentage of the population in Latin America. Feminism and artistic activism give visibility to brown identities and communities, appealing to intersectional theories and practices that intercepted exclusive white feminism. Along with this, Latin American feminism has investigated indigenous economies in their relationship with the earth and with nature to question models of human dominance over the planet. From that place, it has shown the criticisms towards Anthropocene models and has proposed a relationship with the animal existence that works from empathy and the transmutation of the bodies. In this conference, I will present an archive that allows us to explore different options in the relationship between art, feminism, and activism in contemporary Latin American art. But let's begin to the scene of activism in Chile during the dictatorship, during the years of the Pinochet dictatorship between the 70s and the 90s of the 20th century, where women undertook a form of collective art which had among its objectives to narrate life in dictatorship through textile works. Textile works that were anonymous, produced by a group of women that were getting resources through the selling of these embroidery burlaps, resources that were used for continue the resistance and fight for the appearance of the disappeared alive in Chile. Then this is an early example of this community feminist or practices made by women working together for the truth. But in 1988, still under the dictatorship, we should introduce in this genealogy of feminist activism in Chile the performance by the Yeguas del Apocalipsis, a collective integrated by two, that it's called Mares of Apocalypses, whose performances are Casas and Lemebel, the two performers, whose performances highlighted the repressive structure of dissident bodies by the dictatorial patriarchal Chilean state. The performance, it was a performance with the purpose to symbolically refounding the University of Chile, in which Pedro Lemebel and Francisco Casas entered the University of Chile naked and mounted in a horse, a performance that proposed to denounce and intercept repressive official speeches in the hands of the state. The theoretician Nelly Richard, French Chilean cultural critic, introduced a gender perspective early in the 80s for analyzing Chilean art, and she created an anticipated critical context for gender analytical perspectives, particularly when compared with the other Latin American artistic scenes. I can say that the exchange, personal exchange, I sustained since the early 90s with the Chilean art scene allowed me to access to the books published by Nelly Richard and the reading she produced of deconstructive feminism, post-structural perspectives applied to Chilean art, which were influential in other parts, like in the Buenos Aires critical scene of analysis, art analysis. And the action of the Yeguas del Apocalipsis is in a way quoted contemporary and reactivated in the repressive context of Chile that follow what is known as a social outbreak, which began on October 18, 2019. Then it was a revolt in Chile that preceded the isolation by the COVID situation. Then in appropriating and continuing some of the senses by the Yeguas del Apocalipsis, the artist Cheryl Lynette created the performance Yeguada, which comes from Yegua, mare, female horse, where performers, both women and sexual dissidents, are invited to participate. The first performance was in 2017, and it was organized to confront the police. In this performance, they used nudity in urban spaces and horsetails as prostheses in order to underline the patriarchal connection between sexuality, sin, and punishment. Social patriarchal conceptions create the perception that feminicides are deserved because sexual women behavior. They organize public performances also in front of the police, in front of the police house in order to denounce rapes, and the presidential palace also to denounce rapes done by the police during the detentions that followed the huge demonstrations that began in October 2019. Through performances, they search, and I quote what they said, they search to subvert, defy, and criticize classist, patriarchal, colonial, and speciest regimes. Also in Chile, became very well known the activity of the collective Las Tesis. They are from Paraíso city in Chile, and they work with the theories of Silvia Federici in her book Caliban and the Witch, and with the analysis of the anthropologist Rita Segato about the structures that articulate violence and sexual violence against women and rape based on social mandates of a fragilized masculinity. The group emerged also in 2019 during the protest, and their most well-known performance is A Rapist is in Your Path, which it has been rehearsed and performed in 52 countries. They confront the organization of the justice, the state, and the president of Chile. The lyric of their performance that is very direct, powerful, and because of that adaptable beyond Chile, was understood as and shared in diverse contexts all over the world. And the lyric said, the patriarchy is a judge who judges us for being born, and our punishment is the violence that you do not see. It is femicide, immunity for my killer. It is the disappearance, it's rape. And the fault was not mine, or where she was, or how she dressed. The rapist was you, the rapist is you, the judges, the state, president. And here are an example of the massive representation of this performance. Let's move to another scenario. This is an early example, 1983, as soon as democracy returned to Argentina. And we can see here the photographer Ilse Fuscova participating in a demonstration for protesting and demanding justice for the femicide of Mabel Montoya. Here is like a list of the groups that were articulating activism. Is an incomplete list, articulating activism in the urban scene, many of them connected with the post-crisis that happened, the big crisis in Argentina in 2001, and increasingly with the feminist agenda. Then it is this group, Public Women, that is working since 2003 with visual work interventions in art institutions and in the public scene, in the urban scene, participating in campaigns for the legalization of abortion, like here, where they said that the same nail is used for making the scarpins for babies, that is used for producing abortion between poor people. No, this is a center of the campaign for the legalization of abortion. No, that abortion exists, but for poor women that are making it in the house, with objects, common objects, and without context, hygienic context, is frequent that they end with a septicemia in a hospital and die. Then they were also making objects denouncing and activating the necessity of the separation between state and church. No, then the only church that illuminates is the one that burns, collaborate. This is a very small object that produced a huge controversy in Madrid, in the Museo Reina Sofia. And they were also using irony, reappropriating actions by guerrilla girls when they design a small book to be distributed in the public space about summarizing the advantages of being lesbians. And they were also participating in actions, urban actions, when the G20 meeting was organized in Buenos Aires in 2018 with this huge flag with the word demasiado, too much, no, like in just one word to say that they were protesting against these economic powers that were planning the future of citizens all over the world, and that it's time to end this kind of economic policies. And since 2007, is also a queer group of artists that make serigraphy, and they make encounters every year and produce objects, prints on t-shirts, and also they print together fabric flags, and also they print during the demonstrations, and then through these prints they are promoting images, colors, and actions representing queer community. This is quite usual to find this printing activity, artistic activity in urban context, and also sometimes in the middle of a demonstration. No? And another group is Chromo Activist. It was created in 2013. They base their work in the relationships between color, words, and protest in urban space. They cross art language with political and social facts, and collectively produce handmade posters that after they bring to the protest, and sometimes they also produce these posters in the public spaces. It is interesting to see how some artists are part of several groups. Like, for example, Marina De Caro is in this group, but she is also into other collectives. And Mariela Scafati is also part of queer serigraphy. Then it's interesting, all these exchange groups that are like different, but also at the same time working together. And of course, everybody can participate in these encounters or workshops for producing these posters, handmade posters, no? And you see that it's a pattern in pink, but they can use blue, green, white, brown, depends on the circumstances and the context and what is planned for them to do for each action. And another collective is Desperate by the Rhythm. That is a group of artists that were making questions about the difficulties to be part of the art world, even if they are all of them very, very important artists who used to have exhibitions in institutions, retrospectives, but even so, a difficult access to the market, then the difficulty for living being an artist, no? And particularly the difficult to get recognition after the 50s is like to be young is consuming the attention, and then when they are older than 50s, the art media tends to forget them, no? Then they are like invading the space through performances, songs, and they were recently also creating a cooperative for works, design works, no? Then exploring alternative strategies. Then, for example, this is Marina De Caro, who is part of two other collectives. Cristina Schiavi is also part of other collective, or all these artists are part of other collectives. Then this dynamic, it's very fluent and interesting, no? But of course, what was really changing the panorama, and I think that it was the moment when feminism as a word that was in some way cancellated or without prestige became into the public scenario again as a powerful, a key word, reorganizing the protest of women in the public space under the name of Una Menos, not a woman less, which is a phrase, a statement, or are words taken from the poem written in 1995 by the poet Susana Chavez. And the words are not a woman less, not a death more. And it was a poem for a protest for the femicides in Guanajuato, Mexico. And the alarming or sad aspect is that Susana Chavez herself was a victim of femicide in 2011. On March 26, 2015, in Buenos Aires, Vanina Escales, that is a communicator and an activist, proposed calling a collective reading of poems Una Menos. And since then, this name was maintained in massive mobilization that was organized in June the 3rd, 2015, where more than 2 million people were occupying the earth of Buenos Aires city around the Congress, asking for the end of violence against women and against feminine bodies, feminicized bodies, no? And it identifies the protest since then. These are the demonstrations in front of the Congress for the supporting the legalization of abortion. And that, as I said before, it has been legalized on December the 30th, 2020, some month ago. And coming from the context of these huge demonstrations and the process of awareness about machismo in art world, and is that it was created Nosotras Proponemos, we propose, that is a collective that emerges with an agenda focused on equal representation in the world of art, on ending violence against women, on abortion legalization. It is a group that was organized through Facebook that collectively and anonymously were writing the different point of a feminist compromise that has 37 points for eliminating machista behaviors in the world of art. And the compromise has been voluntarily translated into several languages like, well, French, Portuguese, and German. And different groups were organized in other cities of Argentina, in Brazil, and even our contacts with Germany. They use symbolic action to make evident the low representation of women in art institutions, for example. And this is the participation on the Day of Women in 2018. It's a collective that works on making flags, the flags after take part in demonstrations. And this is an action made in the National Museum of Fine Arts in March 2018, when the action consisted on turning off all the lights of the museum and just turning on the works of women artists. And the museum was practically dark, in the darkness, no? The group also designed posters. These are for the campaign for the legalization of abortion, and, well, urban actions that are called pegatinas, that is the action of installing the affiches in the street. And it's interesting because after people write on these posters, then this social movement between the graphic pieces and the participants on the demonstration activation through use of these posters, also readings of poems. There is a section that is called We Propose Literature, and then they use to go together with the visual artist reading poems in front of the posters. And this coordination, it's very, very interesting. Also, they present lectures, or they activate also a campaign for protesting for the elimination of the Ministry of Culture in 2018. They make also actions for giving visibility to Argentine artists, designing posters and making pegatinas in the urban space. And this is another example I have of exchange between Germany and Argentina, when the posters were included in an exhibition curated by the graduate student Anke Therese Schulz. No? Then when Germany women's movements were adding to the request of a general strike, no? That is a request that in Argentina was very strongly formulated, that March the 8th is a date of international strike of women, based on the idea that if we stop, the world stop. These are the flyers with the participation of some other artists. And these are also activities for the demonstrations, like building objects like this bride that is whole, is a 20 meters long object that is sustained by the hands of the participants on the demonstration, and the flags that are painted in together, also taking part on the demonstrations. Also, it's interesting to underline the regional links between, for example, the judicial persecution of las tesis from Chile and the action of We Propose to support their freedom, no? And for example, also during the pandemic, a lot of actions online. This was for March the 8th, 2021, calling to the international trans feminist strike, and also actions in the street made on March the 7th for isolation decision of measures respecting the isolation, then actions of pegatinas in the street one day before of the demonstration. No? Then the posters made for different purposes set on the walls of the street together. And also projections in the city that are made for different actions. This, for example, is for March 24, 2021, requesting and setting in the urban space through lights the name of women disappear during the dictatorship, or for supporting the campaign for legal abortion, or the idea of general strike, if we stop, the world stop. Then there are many other collectives, and I want to talk about the Lola Mora. The Lola Mora takes the name from an Argentinian modernist sculptor, and they recognize themselves like we propose workers of the arts, and they choose the apron as their distinctive seal. And they said the apron speaks of everyday work. It is everyday clothing, the only garment that working women sometimes wear. In turn, it has a tragic genealogy, that of the 123 martyrs of New York, workers in the textile industry who died in 1911, burned inside the factory where they worked, from which they could not escape because their exits were blocked. And then they use this symbol of identification, no? And then this piece of brown cloth, no? The apron that they use for demonstrations, for making also stills like this, no? That they set on the wall, and then they use aerosol for writing, for example, in this case, the word mandate. Then this is a group originated outside of Buenos Aires, that is a very central city. And just for crossing with something that calls attention to the increasement of femicides, recently opened in March the 8th, 2021, an exhibition of the feminist Spanish artist Esther Ferrer, an installation on femicides in Argentina. When the exhibition opened, there were 62 empty chairs, one for each femicide, happened in 2021. And in April, there were almost 100 chairs that were going outside of the installation space, invading other sections of the exhibition. It is also an activism, queer activism, like, for example, this group or collective integrated by a couple in life and in art, that are Chacho and Shanone. They live together, they send together their works of art, and it is part of their artistic practice to organize workshops to produce with common clothes of specific colors, hue flags for urban parades in the Pride Day. It is interesting, the recent creation of awareness about brown identity, and this is the artist Flora Nómada, showing that it's in Argentina, a strong exclusion on mestiza or brown identity. No, and as it's a society, the Argentine society, that self-represents itself as coming from Europe, but really the presence of not white, but not black either, but brown identities connected with original and invisible indigenous population of the country, more that invisible, invisibilized population of the country. Then they created this agenda centered on the idea of the brownness of a brown identity. And this is to show in this picture that I received recently, the transcontinental feminist nets and agendas, in this case between Argentina and Poland, unite by looking for the abortion legalization. No? Today Argentina, tomorrow Poland in the poster. We should also consider the specificity of Peruvian gender activism. There are many examples, many artists, but I want to mention this case of the queer museum created by the artist and philosopher Giuseppe Campuzano in 2003. In his queer museum, he articulated a strong critique to the patriarchal canon that regulates Western art history. He collected objects, press clippings, and information through which he organized an alternative history of Peruvian art. He collapsed the canonical discourses, both because the non-auratic objects he collected and because he introduced a history of travesty and queer sensibilities in Peru. Another important topic, and from an intersectional perspective, that is remarkable is the absence of representation of Black artists in the art world, which is traditionally white and linked to high social sectors. Absence that becomes particularly alarming in Latin America, a continent traversed by almost 5 centuries of slavery. An absence that is especially alarming in Latin America, and not just in Latin America, but in Brazil, that it was the last country to abolish slavery in 1888, where Black artists were practically absent. But since the end of 20th century, there were several exhibitions that were looking for the introduction of works by Afro-descendant artists, and it was also created the Afro-Brazilian Museum in Sao Paulo city. The policy of diversity quotas at the universities also contribute between or among other factors to a better artistic education and contribute to give visibility to the empowerment and the participation of Black artists. One of the problems that arise is how to diversify without reproducing the separation, even the segregation of culture based on the skin color. In this sense, the Afro-Brazilian theorist Denise Ferreira da Silva analyzes the participation from the concept of difference, understanding it as multiplicity and not as separation. In this sense, as part of the curatorial team of the 12th Biennial in Porto Alegre, a biennial that finally happened in online because of the context of the pandemic isolation and restrictions during 2020. And I have to say that the biennial is still accessible online. The images, the videos, everything, and the publications is accessible there. The complete team of the biennial, we decided to mutate the traditional percentages of Black presence, but avoiding always turning them over to figures, data, and statistics that journalism is able to make public. We decided to increase the presence of works by Afro-Latin American artists, to introduce their poetics, to integrate them into the exhibition, diversifying its parameters, its aesthetics, but without proposing differentiations based on race. And the texts of Denise were part of our statements. We published a journal that is accessible online where you can find the text by Denise and also contributions for several artists that were participating in the biennial. I have to say that it's not easy to find or to talk about a feminist artistic group in Brazilian art. Female artists in Brazil, although they are very, very important, have separated themselves from feminist identification or feminist art activism. We do not find examples like those in Argentina or Mexico. However, we can analyze the poetics of many Brazilian artists from a feminist perspective, even activists, since many of her proposals were developed on the public scene. This is one excellent example, the work Divisor by Ligia Pape, made for the first time in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. which install in the public scene a particular concept of mass, gathering participation from different communities of Rio de Janeiro, eroding class and race differentiation. She worked with performance and social experiment, and at the same time, for performing the notion of social tissue. This is an early poetic and politic work conceived not as feminist activism, but conceptualizing art as a participative action in the urban space. Then it is important also to go or to recover the example of Rosanna Paulino, who early in the 90s was producing a work that could be analyzed from a Black feminist perspective. She was working on the relationships between violence, slavery, and work. And then she said that located in the widest and lowest area of the social pyramid, Black women who are predominantly in charge of their children work and live in areas of extreme violence. Then Hosanna captures this tissue, this texture, in a striking series of embroidered frames in which she works with portraits of the women of her own family. And Rosanna is a very important artist, for a referential artist for Black women artists and for Black artists in Brazil. She's also an educator. Another example is Shota Mombasa, an artist and performer that has developed rereadings of the museum as a racial repository of memory, or the proposal to decolonize the affections, disobey the violent and colonial formats of structuring sexualities and genders. Jota Mombasa identifies herself as a queer, no-binary, a performer artist who addresses the construction of memory, intersectionality, and the concept of anti-colonial justice. Her performance and her work, although enunciated from herself and not from a group, inscribe forms of activism, like when she read a text about archives, violence, memory in the cemetery of the city of Bogota before a memorial work of the artist, the Colombian artist, Beatriz Gonzalez, and while she was reading, she was burning the sheets of paper. And also when she makes flags with her own blood, with which she writes poetic and evocative texts that usually are hanging like flags. It is also interesting to observe, in terms of activism in Brazil, the relationship between the occupation of the urban scene, the body of women, for example, in the movement known as Slam das Minas, which is a form of poetic and rhythmic competition between women whose lyrics refer to feminism and racial prejudice. It is a movement that originates in the city of Pernambuco and continues in cities like Rio de Janeiro or Sao Paulo, among other cities. It is also part of this Black feminist activism in Brazil, the one that is articulated on education or through educations, just educative programs, such as the one led by Renata Felinto. She is a leader of a research group that is called SINGA, New International and National Siriguitums Generated in Visual Arts, which appropriates the name of the Angolan warrior Queen Nzinga. There are three reasons for this choice, the choice of this word. First, to reverence the Kingdom of Congo, located in current Angola, one of the beginnings of the Afro-Brazilian population, a diasporic culture that connected the Black Atlantic, using the words by Paul Gilroy, a Black Atlantic that it was the center of exchanges that created a new world based in transatlantic trade of people. Second, the second reason for choosing this word, Nzinga, are the possibilities of exploring what she calls the Siringindum, that refers to the connections between Africa, Afro-Brazilians, and Afro-diasporic cultures in terms of form and movement, dialogues present in visual culture and arts. And the third reason is the feminine quality of the word Zinga, queen, who has a biography, that also guides the investigations of the research group led by Renata Felinto to give visibility to women's production absent in official art history narratives of Brazil. The research group proposes to expand and form new groups that are active in different parts of Brazil. And this is a performance she makes, dancing in a place where she called I Dance in the Ground in Which I Stepped. Then she performs with the specific clothes for each performance, creating in iconic parts of Sao Paulo city, places that she identifies with its own territory, like my nation or my place is the place I step, I dance. And another example of Black women activist group is the National Trovoa, which is a group formatted or created in 2019 between artists and curators who come together with the intention of making a national exhibition of visual arts produced by Black and non-white women. And they said, we perceive the need to speak and show the plurality of languages, discourses, research, and media that we produce as racialized women. They declare, no? And they add, we do not accept crumbs from the white circuit of art. It's very interesting, the text they wrote. They said, we denounce, yes, all the violence we suffer because of who we are. And as long as the violence exists, we will denounce it. But we are complex human beings, and our subjectivity takes us to many other places beyond violence. We are many. We think in different ways. We believe in different things. And like all human beings, we have individualities that we express in the way that interest us the most. We do not accept crumbs from an artistic circuit that does not see our existence, and when it does, it is through the distorted lens of the single narrative, of the single investigation. They said the constructions are made by means of agglomerations. The National Trovoa is a simple movement, and in that simplicity lies the revolution. Keep doing the work and debate about it, and recognize what structural conditions of life were experienced to develop it. Simply put, non-white, racialized women, be attentive and listen. And they end in the manifest that they are present, they add information about the presence in different cities: Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, Pernambuco, Ceará, Maranhão, Espírito Santo, and Pará. We are more than 150 artists and curators who are fighting to sustain the process of visibility in the art world. But they don't want to be reduced to stereotypes. This is a work by the artist Aline Mota, whose film Outros Fundamentos recovered her own biographical story connected with slavery, and a research trip she did to Nigeria to connect with her own family roots. And to end, to get some conclusions, preliminary, fragmentary, in process, I can say some things like the feminist art activism involve both women and diversities in the world of art in order to change its patriarchal structures. It's also this connection between feminism and activism and art involved with wider political causes against the repressive structures of the state that regulates the right to decide on your own body or even your right to freedom. And also to say that bring to art the creative experiences of the street or urban demonstrations, where it is an intense research on processes of visualization. We can wonder what is visible or not in a demonstration, what are the symbolic connections between social demands and visual representations. It's a complete field of research that is created through practices of visualization in urban space. And also, demonstrations bring, and activism bring to art and to knowledge in general a process of social creativity full of strategies of action, resistance, and survival. Because during demonstrations, constantly groups' demands are cared and evaluated. Fast decisions has to be done in order to preserve the life when police is repressing. Fast analysis of agendas and decisions are sources of knowledge that is coming for experiences, and experiences became also theories. As we saw through the examples of the archive I presented today, color, movement, individual or community identity, history, human rights violation, women's rights, sexual reconceptualization are together entangled. Feminist art activism is a source of knowledge about representation whose study is in art, or whose workshop is developed both in art institutions and in the urban space. Then until here, sorry, thank you very much for listening my presentation and following the archive of images I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you so much, Professor Giunta. I think we're sending you a very big round of virtual applause, and you deserve an actual round of full applause that unfortunately we can't give you, but it's a wonderful, wonderful talk, and I learned so much, and it was just fascinating. And I think we would open up the questions, so please feel free to write questions in the Q&A, and we will take them. Also, questions in German are perfectly fine. Please, students, please participate. Yeah, I was really struck by, you know, just the way that these artists act collectively and act with their bodies and act really in a way that's almost like a form of self-protection. And outside of the gallery, outside of, I mean, it seems to be even outside of the kind of digital world of communication, it's very physical and very, you know, I suppose this is an anti-colonial type of approach, that you don't want to be inside a structure. So it's really fascinating. I suppose my question is, how do you approach it as an art historian and as someone who's making an archive? So you're making an archive, or you're putting together images, and I was wondering what the, you know, I thought it would be such a wonderful exhibition, as you were talking about this kind of, you know, an exhibition of artistic movements, of collective movements. Is that what you are thinking you want to do with your archive? Are you trying to, how are you going to put it together and as a historian analyze?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that I am an activist also. Then in a way, I have the external perspective of an art historian who is trying to you know, to put away the close practice that linked me to some groups. And of course, I know many of these artists, I work with them, and how to, you know, to visualize a specific genealogy, because some examples I was talking about were part of the exhibition Radical Women, like Monica Mayer or Maria Luisa Bember, but then to see how activism that is very, has a strong presence in the artistic field at this moment, in present time, has roots, has connections with the 60s, the 70s, no? Then this is like the first tool for creating historical distance from my own experience. And second, the other field I want to make visible is how we can approach from theoretical point of view, based on the idea that that practice creates also theory. And that the occupying the urban street involves the necessity to make fast decisions that are not based on based on knowledge. It's a knowledge that is get from street activism for the negotiation with the police, with the control in demonstrations, that makes necessary two things. One, to have strong visual presence, like this bride that was made in a demonstration that was visible from the top, you know, it was in all the newspapers the following day. And visual strong decisions, which are formal in a way, also has to do with the size, with the color, with several formal things. And at the same time, how to make fast decisions, then good decisions and fast decisions that are necessary in demonstrations, because it is a lot of knowledge accumulated. And being in a demonstration means that when police come, because the context is very different for a demonstration in Latin America than in Europe, then the police comes to make correct decisions in order to preserve your life. Then it is a knowledge that comes from this kind of fast assembly, because it's people together that is sharing a knowledge, but don't have time for discussing. Then it's a fast decision they have to make. Then I want to, this is part of the project, no? And to also analyze in a wider perspective or archive, connecting Latin America and even activism, feminist artistic activism in some other places, well, to find a way to convert into a theoretical perspectives all these practices.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. I had a question from the Q&A, and if you open your Q&A, you can also see the questions. Can you see?
No.
Okay. On the bottom of your screen, there should. Okay, I'll read it out loud. Okay, thank you very much for your impressive presentation. I learned a lot. I have one question concerning the perspective of intersectionality, which you mentioned at the beginning. You had a strong focus on gender and race. Could you add a few comments on the role of class in the art field?
Well, particularly in the case of the brown movement in Argentina, which is the process of empowering of marginalized sectors of the society. I want to say something that is very important, that is power and knowledge are very much connected. You know, you don't want to participate in a field if you don't know what this field means. You don't want to be an artist if you don't understand the power of the world of art or what it means, the world of art. Then it has been a process of empowering that in Brazil happened particularly because the quotas, no, the representation in terms of diversity it was converted into a law at the beginning of 21st century. And this opened the access to people that were completely outside of the schools of art to the schools of art. Then the most thrilling process, incredible process at the present is the emergence of strong poetics and proposals coming from Black artists. Then I think that class is present as far as people that was completely excluded from the world of art, basically for race and for class reasons. You can't be part of the world of art if you have to be cleaning houses all the time, unless that is a particular policy that open you the doors of this world, and you understand that it's a world in which you want to participate, a process of empowering. That's why I disagree very much with these curatorial policies that are in a way haunting communities, people that belongs to communities that are not necessarily knowing what the world of art means or wanting to participate. Then it is a process for me to give access, to expand knowledge, and to give real participation, not just the ephemeral presence in a biennial because the curator wants to make its own correctly politics as a curator. Then it demands a deep knowledge and a real expansion and openness of the world of art, not circumstantial. Then that's why in this context, I think that class could be integrated as a factor of analysis, but avoiding this perspective of hounding people for integrating in an ephemeral way. It's a more complex and committed process. Even as curator, as curator, I look to work through processes of knowledge and empathy. And knowledge is the most important, to know really who is making an effort to be part of the world of art. And because of class or race issues, it's invisibilized. It's the work of a curator to know what is really happening. Then I use for this work connections with artists, information, like, for example, some of the material I present, I have to thank to Aline Mota, that she sent me a lot of links. Like before I knew the work of Aline Mota because I knew the work of Hosanna Paulino. Then to work deeply, to be committed, no? And then I don't know if I answer, but I want to present the way I find ethically to work with issues that are important, relevant, delicate, and should not be converted in market.
Okay, thank you very much. And there is a question from Charlotte Klonk. Many thanks for the rich and informative talk. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on the difference between activism in the political realm and activism in the art context. For Jacques Rancière, this difference is crucial. He even suggests that outright political work in the art context is offensive imagery. Distinguishing this from imagery of open meaning and aesthetics. Do you reject this distinction? And if so, for what reasons?
I don't reject, I don't adopt. I think that to open your mind to see what is happening, to keep in mind an ethnographic perspective also in terms to see what is happening. Because it's not that I come from the outside to say to people that is investing their energy in activism if they are doing something good or bad. I don't want to be in a position of admonitions or knowledge who is looking from an outside perspective what is happening in an inside perspective. And the fact is that artists in Latin America, and I think could be in some other parts, because I don't want to exoticize Latin America, could be interested on activism and finding visual resources for getting visibility in urban political demonstrations. They want to participate also from the specific knowledge. And sometimes these experiences of printing in the street, of making workshops for producing flags or projecting images in the city are brought into the exhibition spaces. There are not restrictions, a prioristic restrictions, or I am participating in demonstrations, I don't share that with my artistic work. Then fluency is very characteristic and not a moral code about how, or aesthetic code about what should be or could be mixed or not. Because what is happening is that things happen. Then we have to create rules, or we have to be able to analyze what is happening and to make the theory flexible, open, fluent as the practices are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so any further questions from the audience? Please don't be shy. Yes, Hannah Steinert, thank you so much, Professor Giunta, for this amazing talk. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the recent situation and how COVID influenced or changed activist work, such as in Argentina.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, it changed it, of course, because the occupation of the urban space was more in the hands of conservative groups that were spreading the idea that the COVID was a creation, I don't know of who, and it is a tool for the government to control population, and this kind of rejection of the isolation policies and even the existence of the pandemic. In the world of art, predominantly, but not exclusively, it's a respect for the policies of the government to protect the population. Then, of course, it affects a lot the world of art in terms of control audience in museums or closed museums, close or control audience in galleries. We did a lot of activity online, zooming the process of zoomification of culture that affects all the world of art is affecting also activist practices, assemblies, that is a practice face-to-face was do through down through Zoom, and activity on the net, on the online was very strong. And also, for example, when it was a decision to occupy the streets again, then the activism was developed one day before in order not to contribute to the accumulation of people. Then it was a respect for the policies, but not an immobilization at all. Activism continues, and it was a research of different options, no?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Hannah. She has been in the class, and thank you for the students that are present today. It was really a pleasure to share the time of classes with them.
There's another question, if you're able. So Miro Chimmerman, an urgent appeal to scientists and politicians, please invent as soon as possible a vaccination against rape, violence, brutality, killing, etc. Compliments the organizers, moderators, and presenters.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So yes, I think, I guess I'm also curious, since you missed the actual time in Berlin, what you would have planned to do here in Berlin, and what, what can be done to connect, as you introduced your presentation, this wonderful connection between Germany and Latin America. Is there a possibility of starting that again, or do you have ideas?
Yeah, well, my plan was, I have to say that I have a long research that I began in 2000 means 21 years ago.
Right.
That is about the power of images centered in Guernica, exhibited in 1955 in Germany, in several cities of Germany. I have the opportunity to work on the archive of the Hauser Kunst, where, which is a paradigmatic building built under the supervision of Hitler, where the Guernica was exhibited. Then these paradoxes are very interesting for me also because all the process of civil war, the war and post-war was also relevant for Latin America. Then I was planning to do research in some other archives, but also to link myself with artists that are working on activism. You know, the process of creating archives is very dynamic. When there's an archive of what is happening now, then it's based on personal connections and to understand what are the rules of activism in Europe that are very different than in Latin America, no? And then processes are naturally created, particularly because it's one German member of We Propose that lives in Argentina, that is creating connections all the time. And I have to say that the compromise We Propose was signed by a lot of people in Europe. Then it's very interesting in terms of sharing experiences, in terms also to not to accept the regulation of what should be or not should be done, because you know, art is a territory of freedom, and particularly in this context, we are in a turning point in the world at this moment, and I am very much convinced that art is more necessary than before of March 2020. Why? Because if we are in a turning point, we need the way of thinking in art. Why? Because art is an unregulated way of thinking. You don't have to prove anything. And then art allows to approach different fields of knowledge and to produce the light, the explosion, the new knowledge, unpredictable, even unplanned many times, that we need for a world that we don't know where it's going to. Then that's why I was also thinking on sharing experiences about how the artistic community or art history community in Germany, in Berlin, is approaching to this new field in which art and education are absolutely central. But it is a project that I am planning to develop next year, when I hope the situation is better, and it is a plan for me to go to Berlin.
Good. Well, then we'll take this as an introduction to be continued in our next discussion when you are able to come in person. And I think that there are no more questions unless there's a last question. Okay, then I would just say thank you again so much. It was wonderful. Your talk was just so illuminating, and we can only regret that we couldn't do this in person, but we will one day again.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I hope so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All people that made possible to have this presentation, and thank you very much, Franziska and Professor Müller and Professor Kathleen Christian, that was helping me a lot in the process to understand the system, and Luis also, that was assisting me in the courses. It's very difficult to navigate a different site and to learn the tools for teaching in a different structure and administrative organization. Then thank you very much, and thank you to all the students that really, it has been a wonderful experience to share my the material about Latin American 19th and 21st century art.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for participating, and all the best to you.